Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I had this inclination to just mix it up slightly, and while I didn't do that as much as I had hoped, something like "Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast," I did attempt at it. I am joined again by Max Aita, and I think this is going to be kind of a recurring um, series where we come in with a topic, we chat, for 25 to 35 minutes about it, and then we have some discussion about updates to our lives, updates to projects we're working on, coaching successes, and then we kind of round out the episode. So we wanted to talk remote coaching. So as the title of this reads, we wanted to talk about kind of the changes in weightlifting and powerlifting as remote coaching has been adopted kind of progressively, and then to the point where it's almost like saturated the sport, to where I had numerous people over the weekend ask me, or at least on Saturday, ask me what I do for a living, and part of that's remote coaching. People are like, "What do you do?" I'm a remote weightlifting and powerlifting coach. I'm a professional strength coach. That's way more prevalent, and it feels much more normalized than, Max, probably when you started. Maybe I don't remember the exact year. You probably would have maybe 2012 or around that time period.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, so I actually give you a really interesting anecdote about that. Steve Goff, my first coach, he kind of was doing remote coaching years ago. Like we're talking like early 90s. And a lot of it was just like he would get on the phone with somebody, elsewhere and talk to them and, be like, hey, you should do this and this and this. Right. And then they would go and do it, and report back to him a couple of days later. He'd call them probably every day. But yeah, so I mean, like that, it's been a thing. I think remote coaching is this. People put it in this category of like it's new, but it's like all it really means is that like you're not in the same place, right? It's just But he was doing it on phone, then he was doing it through email and video, and it wasn't like a process or system. It was just like, okay, like here's send me a video, and he was doing it with Caleb Williams for a bit before Caleb even
really cool.
It's a long time ago. So yeah, it's kind of I think it's been around for a long time. Yeah.
And for people who are interested, people who don't know who Caleb Williams is, I did a podcast years ago with, I think it was Precision Powerlifting Systems, and Caleb was on that. And it was like a guest episode. Yeah, we talked to him because he was a high-level powerlifter.
Junior world champ, I think, IPF.
Yeah. And then
I want to say 727.
Yeah. Something insane. And then high-level weightlifter. So we talked to, I think we did an episode with like Shane Hammond around that same time, did one with Caleb, talked about the intersection of weightlifting and powerlifting. But you're right. I guess that's something that maybe we as the kind of like people in this space take for granted. You're like, oh, remote coaching is this very specific thing where you have a spreadsheet or a document or Coach Logic. You have some app based way of writing and delivering training programs instead of pick up the phone, ring. Yeah, you got 5 sets of 2 in the snatch. Let's go, 65 to 70%. And if it feels good, you can go up. But that is remote coaching. You're exactly right. The reason why I wanted to talk about this specifically is, one, the prevalence. I mean, I imagine, I don't know if you would agree with this, and I'd almost be interested in hearing your thoughts, but how many people are remote coaching versus being coached in person? And I feel like that's gotta be like a 60-40, 40-60, 50-50 split.
Oh, wow. That you think it's that high? Yeah, could be.
I do.
I mean, so there was a minute in, let's say 2017, 2016, where it was like, I'm pretty sure now everyone assumes remote coaching is just as good, depending obviously on the process. I think that's what we're going to talk about today. But there was a time where it was kind of like, can you really do an effective job of this versus being in person? And again, it's going to be very individual, like dependent, the type of person who works with it. But I think it's become almost like you said, like the norm where it's like a remote coach is, it's just as possible. And weightlifting for sure
Yeah.
We've seen this many times. The powerlifting is even more not even a problem. I mean, the reality there is like most people have gym access at this point to the equipment, so that's never an issue. And it's just, programming and feedback. And that's not like, yeah, in person you might get more, but like even some in person coaching, like if you're squatting and I'm turned looking at someone else and I don't see it, and I turn to you and you're like, okay, let me show you the video. Okay, there it is. So and it's real, and you can get a lot more angles on this, but yeah, it's not like it's that much different, I think.
Well, and I think powerlifting is probably 80-20. I
You
think
think it's that
powerlifting.
high? 80% remote.
I don't think it. I don't. I actually don't know many places where you have a coach on staff who's like working the floor. I mean,
I guess
Max's gym.
that's probably true, actually. Yeah. Now I think about it. Damn, that's crazy.
Yeah, powerlifting doesn't feel like it's got a club or team culture beyond the remote space. A lot of that's just you kind of find a place that has a power bar and pound plates. And you just kind of get after it. The reason why I wanted to talk about this, and maybe with weightlifting, I'll go 70-30 the other way. I think it's probably 70 in person, 30 online. But the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because recently I had two people compete who I coach remotely. Jordan Brown, shout out to Jordan. I know he's listening to this, and now he's giddy as a school child hearing it. He competed over the weekend. He did 125, 160, missed 128, 165, but it was kind of the total. He was actually just aiming for a 280 total, so was able to best that. And then we're I think like another 6 weeks out from the next comp. And then Eric Ibanova, who used the weightlifting AI for a long time, I think he actually used the House program on the Weightlifting House Patreon for
Oh, wow.
years maybe, and made great progress. And he competed at the Pacific Northwest Championships. He did 125, 166. The 166 was a PR. And it looked great to see him fired up. So had
Nice.
those two guys compete recently. They crushed it. And I mean, you have Shania, and we talked about Shania in the last podcast, who just won Commonwealth Games or the Commonwealth Championships. You coach her entirely remotely, and I think that's part of
Oh,
what
yeah.
prompted this. Is like Jordan and Eric both approach this completely differently, just as Shania does. And before we get into like the different types of remote athletes or remote coach athlete situations, let's talk about the kind of like proliferation of remote coaching and how it started to become more normalized. And I think you have a better take on this, given that you've been in weightlifting and powerlifting for almost twice as long as I have. So, what's your experience been like? When did that get on your radar, and then when did you start to feel that transition into coaching most people remotely versus in person?
I mean, that's an interesting story. There's probably stuff I wouldn't want to say as far as like where it began, but or not where it began, but like some of the catalysts for it. But I mean, ultimately, it's like it was the kind of thing I think that was like born out of necessity. There was so much demand for coaching, and there are so few coaches. And even today, there just are so few weightlifting coaches that there's like a natural supply demand thing. So remote coaching just popped up, right? And I think it's still probably always going to be the problem. There's just not that many coaches, or let's say competent, and competent as in like, you know, like I just talked to an athlete, recently that said they had a coach that just lived close to them and just did remote coaching and didn't, really do anything, like just sent the program and that was it. Um, and who knows? You never know what's going on as far as a coach goes. I mean, people they have different expectations or whatever, but so competent coaches is just, there's not that many. So remote coaching became a viable option for a good coach to spread their reach across the country and the world. And I think it's even more obvious in other countries where you look at the Scandinavian countries, there's a ton of US coaches working with them. I know Spencer
Yep.
Arnold, Greg Everett, they're working with athletes in other countries on a lot. I have athletes all over the world. So it's like, it's just, it came out of necessity, but because of that, it became a viable way because you could scale quickly. You could scale from not having a, you know, a gym business that was even like maybe profitable in some cases to like suddenly coaches are making, I'm sure there are remote coaches making in the, you know, 20K a month range, you know, maybe even a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like suddenly it's like a high paying kind of job if you're very good and you're very, you know, you're really a solid business person. So I mean, that's kind of where it all came from, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think that's right. And do you remember the first person you remote coached?
Probably, it was probably like Paula, Paula Randa,
Mm, yeah.
and or like Jessica G. And that was probably like 2010, maybe 20,
Wow.
2009, 10, 10, 11, something like that, like pretty early. Um, and a lot of that was just like, they didn't, you know, they, whatever, we just started working with them for some reason. Um, it was different though, because that was a lot of like, oh, well, they're just going to do our program. So we'll send it to them and then they'll just email me back and forth. And that kind of stuff is not organized and it can be like less formal and it's hard to like, it's not like you sat down like, this is a remote coaching profession, I'm going to do this,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah. I almost wonder, and I kind of, before I get into this,
Yeah,
you've told the story about driving around from gym to gym when you were coaching and you didn't have the like physical location. Was that remote coaching was kind of on the side of that or part of that as well until 2012? You were kind of just gym hopping to try and meet up with people or go to spaces where people would be organized and you could coach. What was that like?
that was hard. I wasn't doing a ton of remote coaching. I was doing a little bit, again, because I was just so busy doing everything else, you know. Um, but yeah, it was like that stuff's like, that was painful because like you're traveling around a bunch of different gyms and coaching almost the same people at a lot of them. So everyone was moving around and it was just like weird locations. And some people were in this space, some people were in that place. It just was, that was chaotic, for sure. I was also teaching a lot of classes, like weightlifting classes at CrossFit
Mm.
gyms. When you started coaching, did you start with remote coaching or did you start in person?
Yeah, well, I remember this is very vivid. I was in the living room. You know, I had this epiphany. I was in the
Oh,
living room.
a
I was in the
weightlifting
living room.
epiphany.
Yeah, I had an epiphany. I was in. I
That's
was
a
in an.
reference for only the original, only the OGs, the Weightlifting Epiphanies podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
Um, I was in a living room and I was messaging my buddies and Zach Worrell. He was a bodybuilder,
Hmm.
and my buddy Jake Daniel is or was a power lifter. And I came up with this idea. I was like, hey, we should all start a remote coaching business. And I don't know
Nice.
what exactly was
Nice.
the kind of ignition for that, because I wasn't remote coached by anybody. I know it was 2014. It might have been seeing like John North deliver a weightlifting program. I mean, like email you a program, and kind of thinking about that. But I thought to myself, like, I want to be an online coach. I want
Yeah.
to set up a website, start getting athletes, and I think I even had this idea of like I want to make a lot of money doing it. Which back then, I was talking to my mom on the phone last night, and we were both reminded that I think the first person I coached was Julie Fishman, who I still coach to this day.
Wow.
So shout out to her. But I charged, I think, like $20 a month, $30 a month,
If I
and
just get 8,000 clients,
then I can make a living.
and that's
Um,
only 160 hours a week of work. So that's doable. I have 4 hours of sleep. That's good.
but I was like, yeah, I want to be a remote coach. That was before any idea of like a physical location, a physical
Yeah.
space, and that was like 2014. So I started a company called Revolutionary Athletics. The R was bookended by parentheses, so it was the R. Yeah, so it was evolutionary. and revolutionary. It's a play on words.
it's
Uh,
it's a revolution. It's an evolving revolution.
yeah, there's a little redundancy in it, but I think it
Just
proves the point.
cramming stuff in there. That's good. I like that.
But I was like, okay, I'm going to do this remote coaching thing. The funny thing is, I did that. So I was one of the first people on these trends. I did that. My buddies dropped out pretty fast. So I worked with Jake a little bit. I kind of, yeah, we didn't handle things in a business way super
Sure.
fairly on my end. So we kind of split ways. Around that time, I wrote an ebook. I was like, I read Matthew Perryman's Squat every day, and I was like, I'm
Yep.
going to write an ebook. And it was comprehensive. It said everything, but it said nothing. And it was just like regurgitations of what Eric Helms had said, and
Yeah.
3DMJ, Alberto Nunez, those guys, with like a physiology kind of training science bend.
What year
That's
was
still
this?
like, what's that?
What year was this?
Like 2014.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So I'd started remote coaching and kind of starting to create content in that way. And then I kind of similar to you, was like a weightlifting coach nomad, and just went to a gym and people would be there and I'm like, hey, I'd like to coach you. We should, just do this here. People would start to kind of aggregate in that place. Maybe go somewhere else, go to another gym, post up there for a while, and then just kind of bounce around until eventually started at Clintonville Barbell. But it's weird. Maybe different from you, because of the time I got into it. I never had this inclination of opening a physical space.
Yeah.
Maybe I thought about it, but it was never a serious consideration of I want to really double down on having a physical location, a physical gym. I probably had that thought, but like I never saw it through. It was never a necessity. Um, so I guess it was something where then the remote coaching side just developed over the next 10 years to where I probably, have a full roster most of the time and kind of sit on that place of like capacity, and
Yeah.
have gotten the systems down really, really well. And I know you've done the exact same thing, which is why I thought this would be a great way to kind of introduce um, the X's and O's of remote coaching, and how coaches can do it more effectively, and then how athletes can also do it more effectively. So from a coaching standpoint, Max, what do you think are the non-negotiables of good remote coaching?
Uh, Something that I've definitely learned over the years is, I mean, the most important thing is communication, right? Um, and it just comes down to everybody being on the same page. Like, like, it comes down to two things: everybody being on the same page, and then at the same time, um, you know, the coach doing their job. Every time I've lost clients, it's always because I get overwhelmed with other work that I'm doing, and I am way behind on like giving feedback and communicating, missing phone calls, those kind of things. Um, so it's like it's always this kind of thing where it's like if you're not attentive to the job, it will vanish in front of you. So that's like the cornerstone of it is communication and being the kind of person who is at least well enough organized to plan ahead. You when I first started doing it, not first, but when I was kind of first down in Southern California, I met a couple other guys that worked for TSA, and they gave me some interesting feedback, which was, I think, the opposite of what I would suggest now, which was
Oh, wow.
it's the client's job to reach out to you, make them reach out to you to communicate with you, because there's 50 or 60 of them, so they got to reach out to you. And I heard that and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So like, because then it's too hard for you to reach out individually. I think that's flipped around. I think that it's your responsibility as a coach to be
Yeah.
addressing it and going after it. It doesn't mean you have to like be harassing people and contacting them and like killing yourself to do it. But I think that like the key is establishing the line of communication. If they're going to be the ones reaching out to you, you have to make sure they understand that, like I tell people, if I give them my phone number, like you may need to text me a couple times. Like I'm super busy, but it doesn't mean I don't want to take your call or don't want to get in touch with you. But, understand that like I want to coach you. I want to do these things. I just need you to, pester me a little bit because that helps me. And if people are usually okay with that, and they're like, oh, I get it. Like, I just need to send Max a few texts and he's going to get back to me. Or I need to just call him, right? I had a call with an athlete today, Lena, and, she's like super chill. But like, we kind of missed the time a few times, but then finally I was like, hey, I got time now because I was dealing with a classic Oakland scenario of someone vandalizing a piece of property. But yeah, it's like that whole rapport, the standard of communication and communicating is the cornerstone. Anything else is secondary to that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you're exactly spot on with that idea of the coach kind of being the person who reaches out. And is like prompt and like clear and complete in what they're communicating. So I think that's like definitely a cornerstone. I think to coach effectively remotely, programming and weightlifting and powerlifting, they kind of have to be like a second language.
Yeah.
It's got to be like, you speak fluently in programming and technique, just because if you're trying to reinvent the wheel every time you write a program, or you're trying to come up with something new or novel, or trying to learn best practices, it's kind of clunky. And it's not that you can't do it. I just think it makes the process more challenging. If you have a good sense of what works, how it works, what doesn't, and if it doesn't, why, and then how to adjust. I think that flexibility, given, I was kind of working on an article and mentioned this idea of complex systems, and there's an interaction I had with Quinn Hennick, and I love telling this because it kind of paints the picture of what I'm going to get into with coaching. I was talking to Quinn about complex systems, and I thought, like, man, I'm reading quite a bit of literature and training and skill acquisition and whatever related fields, and they talk about complex systems. Like, that's kind of surprising, isn't it, Quinn? And he's like, well, no, not really, because everything's a complex system. And I'll actually pull the quote because I think it's pretty telling. I typed into ChatGPT I kind of asked it to define complex system to put in the article, and it spit back: a complex system is a system composed of many interconnected parts or agents that interact in multiple ways, often leading to emergent behavior that cannot be easily predicted from the behavior of the individual components. So the way I interpret that is you have an innumerable number of variables, an innumerable amount of variables. They all interact, or many of them interact, and they interact in very difficult to predict ways, and they create behavior that couldn't be predicted from the interaction of those variables.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have someone run a program. You're like, wow, I wouldn't have anticipated that. There's some emergent behavior you wouldn't have anticipated. So knowing that things are a complex system, it's like you have to be able to have a good grasp of how the best practices for improving strength, improving technique, improving coordination, facilitating that stuff. So I think it's more so you have to have recognized those patterns enough over time to be able to say, if I do X, I'll get Y. I can almost like bypass that complex system and say, here's a predictable behavior we're probably going to get. And it might overshoot and it might undershoot a little bit. But a good example, we talked about our favorite exercises last week. So actually, for everyone listening, if you haven't listened to last week's podcast, we had a little quick fire round of 2 questions. And one of those was favorite exercises we've used recently. And I mentioned the zombie squat, and I mentioned the case study. My athlete Cam, he zombie squat an all-time front squat PR. And it's like, I wouldn't have predicted that, but I would have predicted that his squat patterning would have improved and he would have gotten, quite a bit stronger in those positions, given the demands of the exercise. So that was something that I didn't predict. Very welcome. So as a coach, to quote the On Coaching podcast, you have to be able to think in patterns, not pieces. And I think having dealt with this stuff enough, you can do that a lot more easily. it takes a lot less bandwidth with a lot less friction and becomes more seamless, and then therefore becomes a much more efficient process. And you can tolerate more athletes, which begets itself, right? You have more athletes, you get more results, you can process them, iterate, and then improve on your process better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the way to sort of touch on what you just said, like a lot of like the way we think about it is like, I would define it as like deterministic and non-deterministic systems, right? Where like a deterministic system is such that the input gives a predictable, not even
Right.
predictable, it gives an
An
exact
exact output.
output every
Yep.
time. And that's like, the best example of that is something like like a light switch, right? You turn it on, you're going to get light, right? I mean, obviously, barring everything that goes on in the universe outside of that, but like, it's going to happen, right? Like every time you drop an apple, it's going to hit the ground, right? Whereas like these non-deterministic systems, very much like the coaching process or the program, they're probabilistic in that like that like there are better and worse trade-offs in decision making, but it doesn't mean that every time you make that decision the trade-off is always this way. So it's like, well the trade-off is always the same. So like squatting is going to make your legs tired to some degree, but the same workout you did a week ago versus today might have a different impact on the magnitude of that response. But probabilistically, like if you do squats, it's going to have a similar effect that it did the last few times, right? But it's not the same, and it's not necessarily entirely predictable, right? And so that's like the corner, that's like the foundation of all of this stuff, is that like all coaching comes down to just like these trade-offs,
Well, and I think
like,
a lot of that is when we have, like, if we want to call it an intervention, so a super fancy way to say, like, we do something, we have some sort of program change, we have some sort of program we're implementing, we can anticipate around like, within a standard deviation, like what's going to happen. And kind of to your point about deterministic systems, there's this idea in like psychotherapy and in psychology from certain people that uh, you should avoid. You should. It's more helpful to avoid using the word should, because there are actually no shoulds except for
yeah.
like the moral commandments. Like those are shoulds. Like you shouldn't kill someone. You shouldn't covet someone
Well, is
else's.
it though? Like, what about self-defense?
And there's like nuance, right? Yeah, so you can see like the flexibility of these situations. So should is really unhelpful, and can become like almost like a personal burden to some extent.
Right.
But then you have like laws in which you can say that like this apple should fall to the ground.
Right.
It's more
Right.
likely. It's not only is it more likely than not, it would take a one in a whatever uh, occurrence for it not to happen. So in programming, you're kind of trying to, I guess, shrink that bandwidth of the predictive response, and to say, okay, if we start snatching 3 times a week from the floor versus maybe going like from the power position one day, from the blocks one day, and then from the floor one day, you should be better from the floor. I mean,
Right.
that's like you're kind of hedging in that
Right.
way. But honestly, it comes back to that pattern recognition. As a coach, if you haven't seen that play out, or haven't seen that play out with that athlete, um, or with that like programming modification, then you would say, okay, this might intuitively make sense. But there's a problem with intuition, is it's sometimes recognized, what can be thought of intuition is actually bias. So you have this bias towards thinking that more
Yeah.
specific training is going to improve the specificity of performance.
Uh-huh. That is probably that statement you just made is potentially the most. It's a statement that you only learn, I think, and really ingrain once you've done enough coaching to realize you have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
I've been coaching for almost 20 years. I mean, basically 20 years. And I can think about so many scenarios where you're like, will do this and it should produce this.
Mm.
And it just doesn't. that does not happen. Or you do something and you're like, wow, this person did that, and I'm having a hard time grasping why that happened. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's all a mystery, but it's a lot of times it's like you're not totally like aware of what you're really doing, if you're not keen to be, you're like not keenly informed of the underlying mechanisms and principles, so like a good example is like, I'm kind of going on a rabbit hole here, but a good example would be like, okay, when I do a heavy squat, it feels hard and I'm fighting to make it like a 1 rep max. And when I do a 10 rep max, that last rep feels like a 1 rep max. Therefore, if I do enough of those 10 rep maxes, like that 10th rep is replicating the max single. But they're both slow and grindy for different reasons.
Right.
The 1 rep max is slow because you're applying as much force as possible and the bar is just not moving as very fast, right? And in the other case, you're moving slowly because you're fatigued. You're so tired that you can't apply more force, right? So it's like you get a similar looking outcome, or from the external view, it's like this. Oh, they both move and look similarly, but for different reasons. And the result is that the 10 rep max, that last rep, is not making you much stronger, right? Compared to like a 1 rep max, So it's like this interesting, like, sort of false equivalencies sometimes because you don't grasp like the underlying mechanisms that are important.
Well, and it's saying there are more dimensions to there are more dimensions to training, in that, like, you have your perception of it, you have what's going on in the, like, peripheral level, you have what's going on in the central level, and then you have the emergent properties of all of that together. So when you talk about, okay, well, here's a 10 rep max, if the last rep feels the same as a 1 RM, it's like you're the training specific. And I think what you're getting at is perceptually, yeah, that might be true, but physiologically, it's untrue. Just because with that last rep in a 10 RM, the preconditions to that are change in within the muscle, within like within all the parts that are basically making it happen, to where it's not equivalent. So I guess we basically came up with two big ideas for remote coaching for it to be effective, and we probably said a lot of stuff in between those. Maybe some lesser or more helpful, which is good communication or effective communication, or at least communicating, and then also experience. I think that was, just to sum it all up, it's experience. Having enough experience with the theory, the information underlying it, having enough experience in the practice of it, so implementing it, and then enough experience with the integration, and then saying, like, okay, subconsciously and consciously, I can do an effective job. From the athlete standpoint, Max, how would you explain an effective remote coaching situation on the athlete's end?
So I would say again, it's communication, but a huge part, and this is the thing. I actually had some interesting conversations this weekend during our meet, but this is the thing where it is providing your coach with as much data as they need to inform their decisions. Not providing them the data they need is just, like a suicide for your coaching, right? Where it's like, if I say, hey, Josh, here's your workout, I want you to give me the feedback, like tell me how it felt, and then give me the rating of the RPE for the top sets or something. And you just literally say, I did it all, and I don't know, was that whatever?
Yeah.
Or you send back the best is, you like, hey, you've got a set of 5 at RPE 8, and they'll be like, I don't know, I only got 3 reps. And you're just like, whoa, what the fuck was the warm-up sets? Like, how did you get there? That's impossible. It's impossible to not do a set of 5 at RP8.
Right.
So it's very much like, in my opinion, it's providing a huge amount of not huge. It's providing all the data your coach is asking for and doing it to the best of your ability and adopting what they ask you to do. Like if I say, hey, we use RPEs, try to learn it, right? Spend time with it, communicate with them, talk about what you do and don't understand about it, and just be open about that. If they are a person who writes percentages, then, make sure you understand what you want that based off of, how you apply it, all these things, and just, dig into their process. That's like, in my opinion, the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what you were saying is that interpersonal component, which is the coach will say, these are the pieces of information, the data that I think are relevant. If you can provide me with that stuff, we're gonna be able to do a better job. So if I say, here are the RPEs, here are the sets and reps, here's the prescription. If you can give me this feedback, I can do a good job, because then I know how the program's taking hold or not. I would kind of run along the similar vein, but say like the intrapersonal aspect, which is, can the athlete have like their own self-awareness of what they do well, what they don't do well, and then the type of, I'd say the type, it's the athlete type, because that's not what it is. But
Yeah.
say you're someone who is very, very strong, your technique's not great, and you're like, man, I don't know, training just doesn't feel really heavy, really hard, really challenging. So I've been pushing that stuff. I've been pushing the lifts more to kind of feel like I'm, getting effective work in. And it's like, well, I think that intrapersonal awareness is lacking a little bit. If you're really, really strong, your technique's really ragged, things should probably feel higher quality, easier, better, move well, lighter. You maybe feel less fatigued. Maybe the training's broken up in a way where you get more like first reps, so you do 10 sets of one instead of 3 triples. So having that like intrapersonal awareness of, oh, I'm an athlete who is generally stronger, struggles with the technique, generally more technical, struggles to get strong. The weights are lighter. That means I can actually push myself more and hit higher RPs more often. You also have a good sense of how you generally respond to training. Say maybe around week 3 of a 4-week block, I kind of feel run down. On week 4, I generally feel good.
Yeah.
Or I had an off day, and then generally from that off day, I know that's not going to last, so I don't have to stress about it and worry. And that's without being prompted. So that's without the coach saying like, "Hey, this generally happens." Oh yeah, that's right. So I think that intrapersonal component is really important.
Do you ask your athletes to give you like a report, like not a daily, but like, hey, end of the week, just try to summarize things, or maybe like give a little more info? It's funny, I never do that, but I keep thinking like it might make more sense to do like a little bit of like you send a questionnaire out at the end of the week. I don't really know if it's that effective. I know some people do these things, but like I also feel like questionnaires, people just get tired and they don't want to do it. And like most lifters just want to lift and go heavy. Like that's pretty much all of them. But yeah.
I know.
I
I
don't
think
know. I'm
those
curious.
are. I would say that generally after workouts, I'll ask people how they felt and see how that like lines up with how their lifts looked. And then I would say like I try to get a wrap up or a summary, but I think having it more formalized, like in a platform, would be super helpful, right? Because you could read comments and you could read workouts, but I think that aggregation of the training week, you get a sense of like how the person's feeling about the work they're doing, versus like that, when you have a bad workout, it's like, things are going to shit. Life is, kind of on the decline. I don't know if I really have it in me anymore. And then you have a good session. It's like, you know, praise,
Praise Allah.
praise the remote coach. Um, and then at the end of the week, it's like, oh, all of that stuff kind of washed out. It's like, had a good training week, some ups, some downs, but I think we're on track for where we want to be. I think like session RPE is important for that reason, because you get it without a bunch of words. And then I think almost if you had like not like a weekly RPE, but that's almost what it would be. Like, how challenging was the training week? And then you just
Yeah.
rate 1 through 10. I think if you watch that along like 28 weeks, 24 weeks, 20 weeks, what that trend would look like weekly instead of daily.
Yeah, I'm going to integrate. I know I've talked about this. I want to integrate into the Coach Logic like a daily session RPE. Like we want to do is like a daily questionnaire, something you can generate on your own. That
Almost like a drag and drop. You can kind of pull questions in or create questions, move them
no,
around, and
no,
then
we would
like
just
submit
use no, we'd use an LLM. So
it.
you just tell it what you want. Be like, generate me a questionnaire with these questions,
Okay.
and then it'd just be text based, and it would generate something like that. That way, you could just do whatever you want. But something, yeah, like drag and drop interfaces are a nightmare sometimes. Like there's just a lot of
Yeah.
nesting and shit that you have to deal with. But yeah, like a session RPE would be the most obvious thing, like, or end of workout RPE, like how hard was today? It's hard to do with like across the board, like weightlifting, and like they just are different things. And so people, it's also like, I feel like a lot of times people will just struggle through something and then just bullshit those things to where it's like you like they'll miss lifts and rate it at not an RPE 10. Like you had a day where you missed bench press reps, like you failed, and then you're
Mm.
telling me that the whole day wasn't a 10. It's like somewhere in there it had to be, and like granted it's accumulation of all things, but it's like you gotta, like, it's not a 7. That's like you missed the bench, right? So
Mm.
something's there that, you know. So that's my only concern with those things being super, it's like accurate, but like super useful. Where like sometimes people try to game the system. This is my experience with a lot of, like, I'll say a certain type of athlete that is very driven and sees themselves entirely as like, okay, I'm gonna do this and this and this, and that's gonna work. And they almost see your programming as like, I know what's better. I'm going to modify it to get it to work for
Mm.
me. Um, you know, yeah. And so that's my only concern with some of that, is like they sort of try to game you, right?
Yeah, but I think that then wouldn't be a problem with session RPE. I think it
No,
would be a problem with like how you define it and then how
right,
you
right.
measure it,
And
because it was like the inherent problem with RPE in the first place is it wasn't our reps in reserve RPE. It was just effort level. So it was like you do bodybuilding, you're like, oh yeah, that was like a 7, but I hit true failure. It didn't feel that hard, but I missed a rep. So I think you just, yeah, you modify the measurement system to say, okay, is it based on performance, or is it based on perception of performance? Is it based on combination of? Um, because I think there's merit to it. I think there's merit in saying at least how it would contrast. I mean, maybe that's in alignment with what you think. You're like, okay, this is a 10 out of 10 workout. They missed reps, therefore I would rate that a 10. So that there's no incongruency. But when you that whole idea of what you could mistake, what you think is intuition is actually bias, which is not my own quote, by the way, for people listening. I don't remember the source. But if you write training that you would never have imagined would work, or that's like too difficult or too easy, and it's like kicking ass, it's like, okay, I almost want the session RPE to try to anchor me more to what the person
Yeah,
needs, which
that could be
is,
true.
well, it's like, well, we did 20 sets of 10. You should be smoked. And it's like, nah, I'm at like a 5 right now. It's like, okay, that's not, there's no incongruency there. That's just based on the measurement, based on the thing we're measuring. That's how it lines up. So I'd like to see that integrated. I think that's a really helpful feature, especially if it has like a green light, yellow light, red light kind of stop and go system, or something in between, like a gradient or something, so you can kind of just pick out outliers and then kind of manage those.
Yeah, I think so. I Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, it's like sometimes you just have to be aware of who the person is, right?
Yeah.
And not get yourself caught up in like you playing too much. That you'll get that rapport as you coach them, and that's a lot
Mhm.
of what communication is.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I agree. So I think from the athlete side, what we both came
yeah,
up with is like the interpersonal component, and the intrapersonal component. So the athlete being able to communicate what you need as a coach to effectively do your job, and then the athlete kind of having an understanding of how they generally respond to training, just like having some sort of awareness of the training process itself. And I guess that would be like some education of what training is, what it should be, what it isn't. That way, like, soreness isn't doomsday. It's an artifact of novelty and eccentric loading and kind of exceeding tolerance. And then, other aspects of training that could be really useful to understand.
Yeah.
And then I think we wanted to round out the show. We talked a little bit beforehand about a feature of the Coach Logic coaching platform that is new to me, and I'm figuring out how to use it effectively in my coaching process. But it's the notification center, and then how that's going to run. So for people who signed up for the beta use of it, or will sign up, or eventually sign up, how can they best use the notification center, and then how's it going to change over time?
So yeah, the notification center, we just had a conversation about it, is what we're going to do is in the area. So as you do, as you're like doing videos, I guess you call it doing videos, whatever that means. Doing videos can mean a lot of things in today's world. But when you're recording or watching a lifter's videos, right now we have a forward and back sort of toggle that allows you to just jump from, if it's on snatch video 1, it goes to video 2, 3, whatever. But we're going to add some filters there that allow you to basically jump through all flagged videos or jump through every video. So you can just go into the videos and just hammer through them and go really quickly and give direct, poignant feedback on each video very fast. The reason we're doing a lot of this is because we've been working on, and I've shown you some of the examples, but dealing with the session summary. So at the end of a workout, an athlete will receive a summary of what they did in that day. You back squatted, you front squatted, you deadlifted, you hit this many sets, this was the weight, this was the RPEs you gave, you overshot it or undershot it. Basic info to start. We'll iterate on this as we go. But in that summary, what's going to happen is the system will pull the comments that a coach has left on the videos into that summary. And then we'll also link the video or the image that you've added to that comment. So you'll get, at the end of the day, an athlete won't have to sort or look through anything. They'll get a single, unified, just single, basically like text report with video, with all these things that you'll be able to just watch and go through. And it'll be a really concise way to deliver all that feedback. And it'll also take a little bit of the pressure off a coach, where you might have a session that's like pretty bland, nothing special happened, but the report's generated for you. Basically, you can throw some comments in there, you can modify it, you could delete it, you don't have to use it, but it gives you the ability to sort of like at least send a little more of a professional, comprehensive packet of info at the end of the day, so that you're not in a place of like, just, hey, today was good, even though that's all it is. I feel like it's going to be the kind of thing that really reassures athletes that, there's more to this. The data is useful to them. So that's just like the notification stuff. We'll have a lot more capability there. We're going to beef up a lot of the video uploading. We're going to use a third-party library that allow us to upload videos from servers that are geolocated near where people are uploading. So it's like a way more capable system than what we've got. So that video upload time should get cut down by a lot. Then there's a big update coming Monday, which is going to be multi-copy and paste. So on the calendar, the big calendar, you'll be able to select a bunch of workouts, copy them, cut them, paste them. We'll add in something that you guys are probably not even aware of that have used it, which is prescribed training versus logged training. This exists in the platform right now, but you don't see it anywhere. But the system tracks what you wrote for an athlete. And then as soon as the athlete modifies the system or modifies the workout, it considers everything beyond that point logged training. So it knows, like, if you wrote 5x5 at 80%, and then your athlete modifies that to 4x5 at 75%, it logs that, and then you'll be able to now copy either the prescribed thing that you wrote or copy exactly what they did and paste it to the next week. And so that's like super powerful, so that you can just build on what they were doing and not even have to modify. Like, you didn't get half the work done because it was too much. I can just copy what you did, paste the next week, and then build from there. it also does a huge amount for us for data tracking and those kind of things, like what you're actually writing versus what they're getting done. And we can reference that in the summaries as well. But yeah, that's a big functional thing I don't think it'll exist in this update, but it's coming, in the next ones.
Oh,
And
awesome.
then we're integrating coach billing as well. So now you'll be able to bill your athletes either subscription, one-time payments, or you can do a one-time payment or a subscription model. You can add free trials to the beginning of anything. So now you can start selling your coaching through the app and billing your clients directly in our app. I think that's the three big ones that are coming. I can
How
check
does
with the
that
coach.
work with the template feature? Are you going to be able to sell templates?
I mean, you could do that with this. Yeah. I mean, you can't, the way, like, in the sense that, like, it would be automated where the person could just click a button and buy the template from you. That's not built out yet, but you could charge somebody through the app and then assign a
Mm,
template to them for
okay, like
whatever.
a
Yeah.
one time
Yeah.
fee they would
One
pay
time
you, and
payment.
then you would just assign
Yeah.
them. You can pretty much like drag,
Yeah. You
or
could
I don't
just
know how that would
go
work,
and
but
you just assign it. There's in the
okay.
template section, you can assign it when to start, whatever. You can even write like a 2-week trial as a
Oh, that's
template,
cool.
assign that, give them the trial, and then if they like it, then assign another template and charge them. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do there. And then the third thing is the movement library. So now we have a library section for movements where you can upload a video demo of the movement and write a description. There's some other stuff in there you can modify and do some other things to the exercises. You could link a YouTube video or whatever, if there's some other video hosting platform you use that off brand that no one knows about. Vimeo, I think, is the only other one. And then, yeah, like, so there's a ton of stuff coming Monday. It's a huge update. And then there's going to be a bunch of the amount of stuff we're pushing out is a lot of it's little things, but they're coming. And then the end of this week coming up, we'll have, I believe the plan is to have um, the day view. So it's like a maximized view. So if you click on a workout, it'll open to a full page with the day, just the whole day
Oh,
on it.
cool. Yeah.
And from there, we'll integrate the history. So if you click on Snatch, you can look at the Snatch history, like all the previous Snatch workouts. You could look at the prescribed training of that day versus what the athlete actually did. So you'll be able to look and directly compare, like, I wrote this and they did this. And there'll be a bunch of other cool stuff we'll be able to do from that day. But that's a cool view that'll really make a big difference. And then some other updates, some font updates, and then the athlete homepage on the client side is going to get updated and be
Hmm.
trimmed down to be like, it'll just be the calendar and the workout. So you get there, you land on there, and just go right to your stuff. And we'll build a little like notification thing for when a coach leaves feedback. You just pop it open, it's right there. And then the kilogram pounds toggle will be in there as well. So that's like
Awesome.
end of this week. We're shooting for that. And then the long-term planner is under construction. So once this stuff's all there, the wide release beta is going to go out, and then the rest of my nightmare begins trying to get people to switch over and use it. So
Yeah, which will actually
yeah,
probably be an easier process than I think anyone
yeah,
imagines. Like, especially if they listen to this podcast more than once, they realize the power of it and the capability that it has to improve their coaching process, and then improve the abilities of their own athletes and lifters and clients to
yeah.
execute their training, provide feedback. So I think it's an obvious win. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited for people to use it, and for all the updates to get pushed, because it sounds like something that won't exist unless you do it,
Yeah,
which
I
is what's happening. So
because no one else is that dumb. But
yeah.
yeah, it's going to be pretty awesome. I mean, like, all these things are also going to basically combine. We'll put the session summaries and the LLM stuff has all been up. We constantly iterate on those things.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, this is all coming together, and then we'll start integrating some computer vision things probably once we get the beta launch, the bigger beta out, because we don't want to just throw a ton of shit in our way and end up running over ourselves again. But
Yeah.
it's coming together. The program generation stuff will come out too over the next before end of year. But we've kind of slowed down on that because we really want to make sure we get the platform as stable and as good as we can, so that data collection can be, a pipeline for the computer vision. It just depends on data sets at this point.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. Max, if people are interested in following you, keeping up with what you're doing, where can they go to sign up for the beta of the Coach Logic platform? And then where can they reach out if they have any questions about it?
Yeah. Literally just go to app.coachlogic.com and you can sign up. Or you can go to coachlogic.com with a K and click on the link and it'll take you right to the sign up page. If you have questions, then, shoot me a message on Instagram. You can go to the Coach Logic Instagram, drop a message there. And then obviously Josh now works for Coach Logic and he's going to be doing a bunch of content stuff. So he'll be pushing out a ton of content that goes on the app, that goes in the app. It goes on the website. There's a blog on the website now.
Yep.
This podcast will probably end up on there, hopefully.
Yep.
And then, it's going to be pretty sick.
Yeah. So if people want to keep up with anything we're doing, I'd say coachlogic.com. That's CoachLogik.com. If you're interested in following us on Instagram, you can follow Philosophical Weightlifting, Josh_Phil WL, and Max _Aita. You can keep up with all of our shenanigans, and then you can fill the time between these wonderful podcast episodes that you love so much. And I hate to break it to every single person listening, but this is the end of the show, and we will catch you all next week on another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast.